David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience. Welcome back. I've got a real treat for you today. I'm excited, and I have so many questions for this gentleman that you're looking at right now. Bobby Holland Hanton, welcome to the Bond Experience.
Thanks, David. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Wow, it's our pleasure, and I've got to introduce you for the horribly uninitiated that don't follow you on Instagram and some of your other social media. But you are stuntman, actor, activist, entrepreneur. You've got a lot of different titles, but we'd love to hear your story today because you've been a stuntman for, I don't know, names like Chris Hemsworth, Henry Cavill, Christian Bale, Chris Pine, Ryan Reynolds, Jake Gyllenhaal, and some guy named Daniel Craig, I think, give or take.
Yeah, that's it. Well, I mean, I stunt doubled for Daniel Craig on my first ever stunt movie job on Quantum of Solace when I was 23, which is 13 years ago, many moons ago. So yeah, I've been, been very fortunate to have had a very good career to date. I want that to continue. So, and I've worked with some of the most amazing people and directors and been to some of the most amazing places. So it's been great.
It sounds like it. It's interesting too, because when I was looking into your story, I almost feel like being a stuntman is in your blood. I mean, it started when you were 4 years old. You started to do gymnastics and then transitioned pretty quickly to live shows. And I love how you put that at 17, you retired from that to do other things. But what was the trajectory that eventually said to you, I want to go through the 4 years of training of being a stuntman?
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? If I'm totally honest, early on, growing up, I only had one goal and one vision, and that was to go to the Olympics in gymnastics and compete for Great Britain in men's artistic all-round pieces. So I was very much single-minded, channeled my energy into trying to achieve that goal. And when I got to about 15, just towards the end of my 14th year, I started to grow pretty quickly. I had a huge growth spurt, and I think with the growth spurt spanning over about 18 months, but how much I grew, I went from being the smallest gymnast in the club and in the age group in the country to the tallest gymnast in any age group across the country. So at that point, I was 16 and I was nearly 6 foot. And as I'm sure you know, for a gymnast, that's no good really. I mean, back then we had to, the high bar was set at a set height, and you couldn't change that. And when I used to swing high bar, every long swing I would kick the floor, just because the flexion in the bar, and I would kick the floor. So I'd lose 0.1, 0.2 every swing. So it became very difficult for me to control my center of gravity. Much harder to control the levers at that standard, and that obviously put a lot of strain on my lower back. So I suffered a minor stress fracture at 16, and I got to 17, and I was doing okay. I always felt I could have done better if I'd have moved out, especially just down the road to London. But I was doing okay. I was in the top 4 of my age group in the country. I was getting ready for the Junior European trials. And then I had the best Russian coach who came to the UK, and he was the national squad coach, and Vladimir Zaglada was phenomenal. And he coached me for about 6 months, or the last 6 months pretty much of my career. And the improvements I made in such a short period of time were phenomenal. And I was getting ready for the Junior Europeans, and there was a good chance I was going to get a spot. And he actually ended up having to leave and go into America and coaching there. So I had 3 big elements that played a part in my retirement, and that was my coach leaving. I grew too tall and I had a major back injury. So it was time to look for something else. And it was, it was a big blow. I was 17, it's quite a vulnerable age my whole childhood was spent in the gym 5-6 days a week, 3-4 hours a session. Then we would travel around competing in the UK and the world. So I had all this time on my hands, 17, and it was a big shock to the system. But I then at 19 auditioned for my first live action stunt show at Legoland in Windsor, which was a high diving show as well. And I got the job, and I kind of started doing live shows and acrobatic shows from the age of 19 until I was 23. But around 21, I decided I wanted to find out how I would train to become a professional stuntman in film and TV in the UK. So that's where the training came along, and I started my training, and I actually got Bond when I was 23, and I had 4 of my 6 skills at that time, nearly the 5th skill. But obviously, getting Bond is the biggest job as a stunt performer in the world, and it was my first job. It was crazy. It was something dreams are made of, you know.
Do you, I mean, I would imagine there are tryouts that, you know, it's almost like an interview, if you will, for those type of parts. But I mean, do you actually go and try out for something like that, or?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I had a phone call and I auditioned for Quantum of Solace for Gary Powell, and I think it ended up being 4 auditions. And it was an elimination process of the other performers that I was up against. You know, it got narrowed down one by one until I got the phone call and offered the job, which was obviously, again, like a dream come true. I pulled over the car and called my mum in tears and said, I've got the job. And that was the start 13 years ago, and it's been a roller coaster ever since.
It has to be. I mean, you've played some iconic roles, but I mean, James Bond, I know, you know, it's something that, you know, even as an American, you know, you're brought up with. So, I mean, it must hit you in waves that you're suddenly going to be in a James Bond movie, stunt doubling as James Bond.
David, I mean, it was, you know, it gives me goosebumps thinking about it now. It was just such a, I think also I was almost, and I'll be totally honest, I was a deer in headlights. It was my first experience in film, and what a way to be thrown in at the deep end. And it was kind of learn, you know, make sure I'm, you know, focusing, learning from the team. And I was learning from one of the best teams out there. And it was a, you know, it was a learning curve for me every day, and a big one. And it was something that, you know, I think if I'd have been given that opportunity at a younger age, maybe at 21, I would have blown it. It was big pressure. And, you know, I'm just so thankful and grateful that I was given the opportunity when I was given it, and I got to learn from the best in the industry that, you know, has helped hone and propel me into you know, my career to date.
There's some great pictures of you. We're going to show them here of you. I believe on the rooftops in Siena with the cranes and the wires and things like that. That was part of the stunts that you had to do, the rooftop chase.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reason I was employed in the first place was the art gallery sequence, all the rope work. That was the original reason I was called in to audition, and, you know, given the opportunity to play that part. Stunt double for Daniel is in that sequence. They needed someone that was around Daniel's height, that had a strong acrobatic background that could, you know, because the sequence and the scene was a lot bigger at the beginning, and then it, you know, due to budget, timing, script changes, it got cut right down. So I actually only did a small amount at the end of it. But by that point, I had been rehearsing with the team at Pimer Studios for the 5 weeks, and it turned out that I was a good build for to stunt double for another actor that fights James Bond, Neil Jackson. Yep. So I had a fight with Daniel Craig and Ben Cook, who was the fight double for Bond, in a room in Panama with knife and scissors and slippers fight that Ben put together. It was awesome. Get smashed through the doors head first, and then back first through the back doors. So and in Panama was the first stunt I ever done on camera, which was the balcony jump in the slums of Panama at 2 a.m. in the morning on a night shoot, 3 stories up, and you know, no safety wires, no safety mats, because of the way that they needed it to be shot. And that was my introduction to the stunt industry. And you know, I look back now, and it's still one of my proudest moments in my career today.
I've got to tell you, from a fan standpoint, that fight, and I was going to ask you about that, because you don't only play Bond, you actually play the character Mr. Slate in that film as well. And that fight was rated one of the most brutal and realistic Bond fights in the entire franchise by the fan community, because Bond is an assassin. I mean, yes, he's a suave spy, but at the end of it, he's an assassin. And it really does look like 2 assassins going at it.
Exactly. And I think, you know, credit to Gary Powell and Ben Cook was the fight arranger and also Bond's fight double. And, you know, he put together such an amazing fight. And that was actually also my first ever fight on camera, you know, which I spent a lot of time rehearsing it to make sure it was up to standard. And I had a lot of help from Nikki Berwick, who's also, you know, a fight specialist in her field, So I had a lot of practice and rehearsals and, guidance from the team. And, Neil's, I actually spoke to Neil the other day, actually. He's a great guy, great actor. And it was an honor to stand double for him and to fight against Bond as well. It was amazing. Like, sometimes I pinch myself to think, what that experience was. And I guess sometimes life is so fast paced, and I've been so lucky, and I feel so privileged to be able to have been, working nonstop for the past 13 years on some of the biggest movies, the biggest movie of all time in Avengers Endgame. And I need to sometimes take a moment and sit back and look back at those experiences and appreciate them, because it was an amazing experience. And, to be given that chance at that level, that doesn't happen very often. So, again, it was an amazing experience.
Well, to give credit where credit's due, I mean, it looks like and I've just seen videos as a third person, fly on the wall. You work your ass off, and what I love about what you do on set, and I could tell this, you have a real relationship and friendship with a lot of the people that you work with. By the way, for those that don't know, on Instagram you have Prank Wars, which I love. I follow religiously. And you genuinely look like you're having a good time, but you're also incredibly professional. And as a layman, it kind of begs a question that I have, and I think some people have. I mean, clearly you get hurt. I mean, that is unfortunately a part of your job, to take those risks. Have you ever been in a situation where, you said, wow, this is beyond, what I'm actually comfortable risking?
Well, you know what? Actually, no, I've never. And if that issue arises, then that's, working with such a good stunt team, and it's a team effort. The team makes the difference and makes these things work. And by having an amazing stunt coordinator that's very experienced, that's been in the game for a very long time, and an experienced stunt team around you, if there's an issue, we talk about it, and we figure out a way to get around it and make it work safely. And that's so important and part of the process that we go through on a daily basis, that people, I guess, don't really get to see that side. And it is dangerous. There's no question. It absolutely is dangerous. It's the nature of what we do. But we also spend a hell of a lot of time rehearsing sequences and breaking them down into small increments, to make them as safe as they possibly can be and ready to take to camera. That's part of our job. And we are artists in our own field. We are stunt artists. What we do is a really special skill. And I think people don't recognize that sometimes either. And I think, we spend sometimes 6-9 months, a year. The coordinator sometimes spends a year on the job, longer. So, because we need to break down the script, break down the action sequences, and put them into previs and back and forth to make sure that it's rehearsed properly, it's safe, it's repeatable. And that's a long process. So sometimes we start a movie much, a long time before the rest of the crew. And again, that's something that we take very, very seriously to make it work. And listen, anyone can do a stunt once. It's being able to do it properly, professionally, safely, and repeatable. And that's the difference.
Yeah, I love that, because it's really not about the risk. It's about planning and doing that pre-planning. So there really is, you mitigate the risk, if you will, which is great. By the way, exactly. I found it really interesting, and I don't think a lot of people know this. On your website, which you have a great website. It's very immersive. It's actually fun.
I need to update it, actually.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, I did notice, like in your news section, the news section's a little bit older, but
it is.
What I love about it, it's immersive. In other words, it doesn't just say feature benefit. You actually get into the life of Bobby, which I love. But one thing I couldn't help but notice on your CV, when you click your CV, it has your body measurements, it has your shoe size. And obviously a part of that is for probably wardrobe, I would imagine, because correct me if I'm wrong, but stunt wardrobe isn't just like, oh, let's take Daniel Craig's suit off the rack. Sometimes it has to be adjusted, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, the costume department, costume designer, they do an incredible job, and they really work hard to accommodate our needs. And that means, sometimes the costume, for example, might need to be a size bigger for stunts, or even 2 sizes bigger, so we can get our pads underneath if we need to. So we go through a lot of costumes, because obviously they get wrecked and we need to use other costumes. So that's taken into consideration and into account for the costumes budget, etc., and the stunt budget. We also have a very much fitted costume that we use if we're not doing anything major and we don't need any stunt pads if it's just a small fall down or whatever it may be. So yeah, there's a lot of preparation that goes into that. There's a lot of preparation that goes into every department to accommodate what we need. And sometimes, for example, you know, if you've got a pair of trousers on that are quite tight, they might put a gusset in the middle that's a flexible gusset that you can actually high kick or be able to, you know, be as flexible as possible for the needs of the fight or the film or whatever you may need to be ready for.
It with wardrobe especially. I mean, obviously you can match a Tom Ford suit to a Tom Ford suit, a Tom Ford tie to a Tom Ford tie. Your body, your physical body is something different. How much do you need to align your body type to the actor's body type, especially when you're wearing sleeveless tops, for example?
Yeah, I mean, listen, David, it's a great question because it's something that's been a part of my career for the duration so far, for 13 years. It's something that the performer has to take into account and take on themselves as the stunt double. It's part and parcel of our job. And I'm very vocal about that because you don't just get the job and then just sit back and you have to keep that job. You have to keep working hard. You have to work on the skills. You have to work on the physicality and take into consideration and really, you know, work on how the actor moves, walks, runs, you know, mannerisms, because that is, you know, but to me, that is the whole package of being the stunt double. You have to be able to not only perform the stunts and have the skill level to as high as it needs to be, but also for producers, directors, they want to be able to say, okay, we can use this stunt double more than we thought. We can, you know, they move and you know, their characteristics are the same. And that's, I find, very important. I've always tried to do that in every actor that I've stunt double for. And obviously most recently the last 9 years of me being in Chris Hemsworth's contract as his contractual stunt double, that again doesn't happen very often, which I feel very lucky and privileged to be a part of and have this experience with someone so high profile, and his career just keeps accelerating at a rate of knots. It's, you know, I'm 6'1", Chris is 6'3", he's 6'4" in the Thor costume, so I have to wear 2.5 inch lifts in my costume boots, which makes me feel like I'm doing stunts in high heels. So I can certainly feel for the female stunt performers out there, which go through some crazy stuff. You know, it's a real process. When we do Thor and Avengers, I have to train 3 times a day, eat 8 meals, 9 meals a day to try and get anywhere near Chris Hemsworth's shape, because he's just a man mountain. He's such an athlete, and he's not just big. He's so lean. He has no body fat. So in itself, it's a job on its own. Forget about the stunts and the rehearsals. To train and eat the way and discipline in that department, that in itself is a job on its own. So it's hard. It's very hard to maintain, but it's a challenge that I take on and you know, I take very seriously, and I hit it head first every time I need to. And, you know, hopefully to date, I've done a good enough job for it to pass.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was watching a stunt that you were doing for the Netflix movie that Chris Hemsworth was just in, and literally you stumbled back off of a bridge and hit the water. And the way you were stumbling, because I mean, I've watched Chris Hemsworth like you have, you know, for all these years. It was perfect. In fact, for a second there, I'm like, is that Bobby or is that Chris? It was really hard to delineate between the two of you. Never mind the physicality, but those mannerisms. It's almost like you're a mina bird of those mannerisms, which was amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I've had a good slice of time to practice. You know, I've been working with Chris very closely for 9 years, and we're very, very close friends. So, you know, he's strong, he's athletic, and you know, by rehearsing that kind of style every day, you know, I'd hope that I'd be able to pick it up quite quickly.
Now, there was something in your CV around Skyfall Inspector. So what was the connection with Skyfall Inspector?
So I did Quantum of Solace, and I started double for Daniel Craig, my first job. And at 23, I was a lot slender. I then went on to double Jake Gyllenhaal in Prince of Persia. I had to put a little bit more size on. And then I went to New Orleans to stunt double for Ryan Reynolds in Green Lantern, which he was obviously a lot bigger. So over these past 10 years, 12 years since I doubled Daniel, most of the actors I've stunt doubled for have been a little bit bigger. So I've kind of kept that size on, and certainly Chris. So when it came around to doing Skyfall, I had just finished Batman on the Dark Knight Rises stunt doubling for Christian Bale. And I was going to be going on to Skyfall to stunt double for Daniel Craig. I'd spoken to Gary Powell, the stunt coordinator, Lee Morrison, who was assistant. And that was the plan. But I was a little bit too big. And by the time I was able to finish Batman and come back to England, the guys had already started prep and they needed a double quicker than I could be there. So it turned out that it didn't work out for me to double Daniel again. But I was on the job in Turkey and helping out the driving sequence. I was an ND driver and little bits and pieces out there. So, I did that. And then on Spectre, Gary asked me to come in and audition to play a little part in one of the cars, in one of the Land Rovers. So I was a passenger for Martin Ivanov, who was driving, and we played small parts in the chase with the plane in Austria. So, thankfully, Gary's got me in for the last couple. And I was, unfortunately, I had back surgery in March 2019, and it took me the best part of a year to recover. So Lee Morrison, who stunt coordinated the latest one, No Time to Die, it was, he asked me to come in for a sequence, but I wasn't physically ready, and it wasn't worth risking it. It's a shame because I've done everyone since Quantum.
Yeah,
it would have been lovely to come in for a day, and that would have, it was close to being a possibility. But I had to take my recovery, it was very seriously, and that was most important, to try and get back to full fitness as quick as possible. So it didn't work out, which is a shame. But I'm looking forward to seeing the last one.
I mean, nobody can take what you've done on the Bond films and all the other films, but for me and in my channel, obviously the connection to the Bond films is so huge. I do have a question for you though around people even watching this, and we've got all age groups. I mean, we've got 15-year-olds up to probably 95-year-olds watching this. Sure. But there are a lot of people, they watch you and follow you. What advice would you give them for the positive of following a stunt career? And what are some of the ones you maybe want to put out a red flag to?
My advice, straight off the bat would be, if you want to be a stunt performer, amazing. I think it's the knowledge. When I was getting into stunts, social media wasn't really around. And I found out through a small knit group of what you need to do. Whereas it's, I hope that I've been able to help drive this as well in my 13 years of putting stunts out there. And social media is quite as we all know, it's a powerful platform. And I think it's, why not show what we do? Because we are athletes, we are, stunt artists. We work very hard at what we do. We risk our lives, to do what we do. And I think it should be more recognized. And I hope that I've helped try and drive that force with, of late. And my advice would be, anyone that wants to be a stunt performer, really do know that you want to be a stunt performer 100%, because it's not something you can kind of take half-heartedly and say, oh, do you know what? I might give that a go and see how it goes. It doesn't work like that in this industry. It's a safety issue. It's dangerous. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to be working with a team that you can work with and take very seriously. But I would also say my advice would be having a skill that you've grown up with, which mine was gymnastics, trampolining, and high diving. That, I think, has been paramount for me in my career. And it's, I'm known as a physical stunt performer with all the wire work and jumping around, smashing and crashing, fights. And that gymnastic background and foundation has really helped me, in my career. And I think anyone that's got a background, it really does give you a good start, because it shows you have the discipline, shows you have the respect and what it takes to be a stunt performer. And that can be in any field. If you're a horse rider, if you're a motocross rider, if you drive a car, if you're a sword fighter, if you've got some kind of martial art, gymnast, whatever it is, parkour, free running, to have a base skill really does help. And then you try and build up your skills around that and experience, and you gain that experience on set. So you train to become a stuntman. Then once you're on the stunt register in the UK, that's when you learn to become a stunt performer. The training is basically a good base to show you have the discipline, you have the determination, and you have what it takes to show that you are willing to risk everything, because that's what it really is. And if you don't take it seriously, it can be very dangerous. So my advice would be, again, just to know that you are 100% sure that it's something you want to do for a living, because it's not for the half-hearted.
Yeah, I love that. It's sound advice, it's sage advice, but I can hear your passion coming through. in that advice as well. You sound like a good mentor around it. My last question is frivolous, and it's unimportant. I'll tell you that right off the bat, but I have to ask, have you been on any movie, it doesn't need to be a James Bond movie, where you were able to actually walk away with an approved souvenir? Could be a suit, could be a hammer, who knows?
You know what? It's the way that the film, and I get this and I understand it and I respect it, is people ask me that question all the time. Oh, did I give you something? Did you get something? And a lot of the time, the lead actors don't get that opportunity to take something home because, you know, the franchise they own it, and that will go into museums, that goes into a lockup where we will use that again in the next film. So it's very difficult to get a souvenir. I'm just, you know, very happy if I can get a cool photo in my costume, which most films, touch wood, I've been able to do that. And that's a souvenir enough for me. To look back at some photos and footage, you know, wearing the iconic outfits and superhero outfits, and you know, that's enough for me. So you know, it would be lovely to be able to walk away with something, but you know, I respect how it works. And you know, for example, I was the last person to wear the Batman suit in the trilogy, Chris Nolan and Christian Bale's trilogy. I was the last person to wear it because in the schedule, Christian had finished all the stuff he needed to do in wearing the Batsuit. So the iconic shot on the bridge in Manhattan, when there's a 360 helicopter shot and it circles me in the Batsuit, that was me, and that was the last time that Batsuit was worn, and now it's been put in a museum. So that's something I know that I can take away, and you know, when I grow old, you know, that's happening quite quickly. You know, I can sit around and talk to my grandchildren, hopefully, and you know, that was me wearing that suit, and it's a great story to tell.
I love that because I always say that the best souvenirs of any experience are the stories. Yeah, the stories, exactly. The memories. I mean, you know, as opposed to something three-dimensional that will crumble over time.
Exactly. But, listen, it would be nice to have something like that, and who knows, one day maybe. And you know, but you know, I'm happy with the memories, and that's enough for me as a souvenir.
Well, we're going to take the memory of this discussion because this was a lot of fun. Thanks for spending a little bit of your time with us, and we'll keep watching you on the screen at all times.
Thank you very much for having me, David. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure as well, Bobby. Take care. This has been David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience with Bobby Holland Hanton, and we will be talking to you real soon. Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching this episode. If you want to be up on the latest from the Bond Experience, just click on this subscribe and subscribe to our channel. You're going to get all the latest and greatest information, plus some exclusive content. And by the way, speaking of content, here's something especially for you, just because we know you. Talk to you soon.